I think this is a good time to, because I see many hands raised now, to actually move naturally to the Q&A. I can imagine many people have questions for you both or reflections. Thomas, great that you're joining here as well, so that we're all together. Joe, you've been very patient. Let me go towards you first and see if you can join us here so we can listen to your question.
Okay, well, thank you. I've been listening to most of this for the last 2 days, and what I haven't heard, maybe I've missed, are words like sacrifice and the cost to achieve a great upshift. We're up against a lot of institutional evil, sociopathic institutions that don't play fair to the elites that run them, that try to, if they perceive you trying to upset their apple cart. I'm saying this from the perspective of being a whistleblower in the Department of Energy about nuclear weapons, okay? You would think that the Department of Energy would want to resolve my concerns. No, the attorneys don't want them resolved for the same reasons the attorneys didn't want the pedophile priest exposed, or the drug-making kings at Sackler, Purdue Pharmacy exposed. They will protect their clients and do so in the name of legal ethics. That's our reality. My point is that I just want to hear your responses to, will there be casualties as part of the great upshift, given what we're doing a great upshift against? Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to say more broadly. I think, first of all, this is a absolutely correct question. We need to talk about costs. We need to talk about darker aspects of, like, any real world scenario, not, let's say, idealized scenarios where we kind of place one alternative against the other and compare them. But the real world scenarios will inevitably have darker reverberations. They will have costs. They will have casualties. I don't think that's it's possible to make any kind of massive societal transition without significant sacrifices of some kind. So something will be lost. The question is, what are we losing? How do we make that transition possible? Because also, what deeply inspires me is that there were big transitions in the history of humanity, in very recent history, where these costs have been significantly minimized. For example, they were not based on violence, as the transition in India or the transition in South Africa or in some other regions, but they were taken through the path on non-violence in the genuine, let's say, idea of shifting the collective potential to the new, what we can call new equilibrium, or new the stationary state, or new stability state, which I think evolutionary stability state. And I think that is possible, but we will inevitably lose some aspects. And I think the idea that we can only get to upshift through collapse, which some people express, I think this is another, because I'm coming from the country which lived through this kind of transition. The idea of transitioning, let's say, from communist state to the capitalist state, which had a lot of sacrifice. And actually, what I saw is that the complexity of systems, and let's say all this gained ability to manage complexity, is being lost in that transition. And that's what we also need to remember, that when we go through some kind of collapse to reach the better state, we can end up in a, let's say, darker scenario. So I think we need to, part of this, that's to me the most essential, is how do we walk this path? Not where do we walk, but how do we walk? How do we embody the qualities of the future in the present? And yes, that will have some sacrifice, and probably the sacrifice that will be made on the personal level of certain loss of quality life, certain loss of, let's say, our ability to coordinate with each other, some loss in some forms of comfort, but that transition we will need to make them, and that it has to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Yes, Kees.
Well, just to add to that, I come from a socialist communist tradition, you know, that was my generation and my interest. And so I read work by Domenico Losurdo, an Italian writer. And he said, what we're now having is a revolution without revolutionaries. So there are massive changes underway, but you can't point to the Communist Party of old or a broad block of forces of old, etc. And I think you can also see that as a fortunate circumstance, the fact that the deep changes are no longer couched in an explicit ideology, which is nurtured and held by a privileged group of intellectual revolutionaries, is, I think, a favorable circumstance, because it cannot be corrupted. You know, the idea that you begin by thinking of your own bodily health, what you eat and how you think, and you know, when variety is your starting point, you don't run the risk of ending up in a dictatorial situation when the quality of the leadership degenerates and you get a number of uninspired nutcases at the helm. And that is how really existing socialism more or less ground to a halt, although it still had potential, I would say. But the quality of the people who were officially in charge of thinking for the entire societies had degenerated to such a point that it no longer worked. So in that sense, is a revolution without revolutionaries is not bad, as long as the revolution is carried out by a broad layer of reasonably well-informed people who know more or less why they're doing things the way they do. I'm a bit unreflected here, but it's what pops up in my mind.
Yes, thank you. Thomas, very briefly, and then we go to the next question. Yes.
Sure, very, very briefly. I think Pavel mentioned that, many think that we'll have to go through collapse so to eventually do this upshift. I mean, I think to me, it's open, but I think it brings to a clear point is that I think casualties are part of the evolutionary process in the sense that the deep problems, conflicts we are facing are the ones that are opening the ways to deeper questions. So they are very much part of this journey of evolving consciousness. So, and the other part of the answer is that I don't think we can. In the past, there have been a lot of struggles to impose a system over one another, and I think, and we see that this leaves some traces, leaves some trauma that then needs to be processed. So definitely, I think the way is about non-violence, and it's not about imposing a new system on another one. It's more an evolving process of evolving consciousness. Yeah.
All right. Well, I have a kind of a short question, but I would like to make a short statement just before that. Basically, what my question is, and I can repeat it, but it's short. What's keeping us from putting those solutions on the ground? And I have a lot of ideas on that, of how people are not doing that, but I want to hear your thoughts, because I'm really searching for the answer for that. Why, if we have all the solutions, why aren't we doing a much better job of putting them on the ground?
Well, first of all, I didn't say that all the solutions are there, because there are some things that I think are almost insoluble now. The reason why a number of solutions that are possible, and like especially technical solutions in the IT sphere, are not being applied in a democratic way is simply because the other side is so well organized and is, as I said, progressive counter-revolution. So that means they suppress the democratic side of an innovation, but don't do that empty-handed. They come with things that are also attractive, like apps and which make life easy for the user. And behind that is a firm conviction that, my own view is that since 2008, we're really living on borrowed time. The economic system has effectively collapsed. The Western-centered capitalist system has effectively collapsed, but it's through all kind of transfusions it's being kept alive. And many people think everything is hunky-dory again. Whereas in reality, if you look at what the ruling classes now and the states are doing to their own population, is terrorism scares, virus scares, with the lockdowns that you yourself was a victim of, and which in my experience has completely destroyed the social fabric. All old friends have parted ways and so on. The health of children has deteriorated dramatically. We have a wave of pneumonia now because it turns out the immune system of children suffered greatly simply because they weren't allowed to go to school and that sort of thing. But if you think about it, that the ruling class attacked its own population to that extent, usually, of course, via technocrats who hardly had any understanding of what they were doing, and certainly not of the consequences. The wars that are being waged, and well, Joe has left us again, but he was a whistleblower from the Ministry of Energy. He will know that it's not an empty threat if a few days now, the United States, with Britain, France, and Germany, have posed an ultimatum to Iran about their upgrading of their nuclear facilities, and enriching uranium to a higher level than was agreed initially. These are no longer progressive counter-revolutionary measures. This is threatening with nuclear war. And Israel, of course, is eager to use its nuclear weapon, which otherwise will become a topic for widespread discussion, to use that now against Iran before it's too late. I mean, that's my apocalyptic instinct, which we will not be able to counteract simply by growing our own food, to put it a bit provocatively. You see what I mean? Yes. These are longer-term trends among the young, who are usually also not interested in politics very much any longer.
Yes.
Which it's not a reply. I'm just thinking aloud.
The Jack waving, yes, and thank you, Kees. This is very, very valid. I know Pavel also wants to respond, and probably Thomas too. I am seeing also 4 more hands up. So what I'm going to ask, for the sake of time, is actually to go to the next people who want to raise some questions before we stay in this discussion. And please say your name, because that's not clear in the writing.
I go by CD, but it's Cynthia.
Cynthia, okay, thank you, Cynthia. Yes. So what I'm going to ask you, plus also all the other people who are coming next, to ask just one question and specify who the question is for, because with the minutes that we have left, we don't have the time for everyone to respond. So just, yes.
Yes, and I actually only had Thomas in mind. So you said we really need a wholesale shift in our mindsets. And also, I have written a book. I called it Avatar Mindset in the beginning. It became Compass of Hope. And so my question to you is, sure, we can work on ourselves, and actually only changing our thinking is going to change the world. Only by learning to be peaceful inside is going to bring increase outside. So we have a lot of work to do. However, most of us don't think we do. And so I'm a little afraid that there's like a spiritual bypass, you could say, going on. We have so much more inner work to do. And so on learning that we have caveman brains, Rick Hansen is all about letting us know that we can't actually change our thinking apparatus without doing some serious, recutting of the pathways. This is neuroplasticity. So intuition will help us once we can kind of get down to the basics of being our best possible self. What does that full human look like? Be that, and then the world will be remedied faster. But do you have any idea of how to change our mindsets? What might that be?
Sure, thank you, Cynthia. So yeah, you were talking about like we need to do inner work. Well, you have seen in my presentation that my focus is more about the collective and how to organize societies in a way that not only deal with every problem that a normal society have or every needs, but doing it in a way that cultivates the human values. So yeah, I don't really separate. The point is not to separate, the inner work from the outer work, but rather that the institution should be framed based upon these higher human values. How do we change mindset? I think a lot is about. For adults, a lot is about deep conversation. So how do we frame spaces that are, deep enough and with the right questions so that we can really look deeply into our problems and be able to change our views. I don't know if it answers your question, but maybe I keep it short because of time.
Thank you. And then we go to Alan, and I hear now that Sergey also has been raising his hand physically, but not in digital. So maybe also, yeah. So Alan, and if Sergey can come here as well. Thank you.
I've been living the four world religions, that's the Abrahamic and Hindu, for 30 years. And I really believe that the traditions that they embody and the institutions that they have shouldn't be ignored in any equation. They do reform themselves, but they need a kick from the outside, that's for sure. And I think there's a sort of balancing of powers, which Edmund Burke talks about. For example, in England, we have the Crown, we have the government and churches and the voice of the people. My question to you really is, how can we get a more effective balance between the nations and the individual governments so that the voice of the people is truly represented? In my view, the view of the people is not really respected very much. And so I'm rather interested to hear how you're going to change it.
Well, not through a purely mental effort. It will always have to pass via serious material confrontations. That's inevitable. So, and it will also develop unevenly. So in one country, there may already be, just think of the fact that it's now South Africa alone, which after 80 days of bloodshed in Gaza has referred Israel to the International Court of Justice. That means something happened in South Africa in terms of what Thomas calls change of mindset, also at the level of the government, which brought them to this step. And I can assure you that this is a step not without risks. And also think of Cuba. Cuba also spoke out very forcefully against what is happening in Gaza. So it will be uneven, but the unevenness is not random, it's based on prior experience. So the mindsets changed, but they change as a result of very, sometimes very cruel and painful prior developments. That's all I can say. I mean, your question is so broad. There's so many implications. Everything about international relations and politics comes into the play here.
Thank you. Yes.
But it's good to ask it.
As a psychologist and psychotherapist, I've really noticed that the main thing that makes people change is suffering. And the big problem, it seems, is that there is so much unconsciousness and so much resistance to change on the planet. And I think a lot of resistance is because the powers that be, or the status quo, or the capitalist system, are people who are so undeveloped in a certain way that they're incapable of changing. So change absolutely terrifies them. I mean, I know I've been in this field for 50 years. The thing that makes people change is extraordinary suffering. It can either kill them, and i.e. sort of crisis as the dangerous opportunity. And part of the difficulty is that maybe people haven't suffered enough. And I'm just taking the thesis of Chris Bash, who dear Arabella sort of mentioned earlier, and also others, and that what we're talking about will be implemented when there's a certain level of suffering. And so people cannot go on doing the things that they've been doing.
Yeah, that's right.
And
I will, yes. I'm going to let Pavel answer this one.
Yeah. Please, Pavel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's actually part of the conversation. What drives evolution? Is it suffering? Is it only discontent? Is it conflict? Is it also some kind of evolutionary impetus? Can we also see evolution of our society at scale coming from the urge to harmonize things? There is a lot of suffering now in the world that people can empathize with. So, for example, one of pathways is to open up to your empathy ability, which actually I think people on this call can all refer to. Is what brings us to this work. We empathize for the suffering that is there in the world. So the question, what kind of discontent will trigger this change? And will there be sufficient discontent to continue to walk on this path? Because I think a lot of people, what I can see, a lot of people prefer to suffer even when things get really bad for them, only to resist change. So I think, at least in my experience, the impetus to change does not come from suffering alone. It comes from something else. And I think the potential of enlightenment movement to awaken up this like awareness, and there's two versions of enlightenment, the Western enlightenment and the Eastern enlightenment. I think the Buddhist version of enlightenment has more profound elements to it, like really deeply connecting with that suffering being of ours and recognize that we can actually find pathways out of suffering. There are these pathways. So that would be my answer. I don't think that, I think suffering is the element of what drives the change, this discontent, but it's not enough.
Thank you, Pavel. And on that note, I want to add one thing before bringing it to David here. And that's, even if suffering had been a catalyst for transformation, if joy can do the same, we owe it to the future generations and all the ones we love to seek the pathways of joy.
And that's part of uplift, I think. Exactly. The path of love, the path of joy.
That's
Yeah.
it. Let's upshift the way we evolve because we have caused enough suffering. So, David, back to you. And then for the final words to Ervin, I would just want to take this moment also to thank all the panelists and speakers here for all the wisdom that you've shared, as well as the public. Thank you.
Absolutely. And this is the great symbolism of death and rebirth, that if something new is going to emerge, then the old has to go. And this is what we can maybe celebrate tomorrow evening when we're all celebrating in our own ways and with our friends. Let's remember the 2 days we've spent together and make a toast. No, tell people about what we've been talking about. Raise a glass, not an empty glass, but a full glass, a delicious glass even. So thank you, everyone. I'm afraid my poem was too long to put into the chat, which I didn't think it was that long, but I'll have to send it some other way. So thank you all, many blessings, and I will just blow the candle out. It's too hot to handle, but I'll just blow it out anyway and send the light out.